Hi, I'm Mark, and this is me trying to start a podcast.
Let's turn that up. Oh, too much gain. We're going to turn that bad boy down. Yeah. Oh, that's what that does.
Welcome to ApexThis Podcast, a podcast about podcasting, or rather a chronicle of my journey to start a publishing media podcasting side business. This will be a behind-the-scenes look at what I'm doing to make that happen. I'll share tips and best practices that I learned along the way. These tips and best practices will be something that you can use to start your very own podcast and share your voice with the world. So let's get started. Here is my introduction. My name is Mark, and I've been listening to podcasts for as long as I could remember. I started out with gaming podcasts and expanded to other topics in podcast series. It wasn't until I became a user group leader did I start my very own podcast and ApexThis. What exactly is ApexThis? As a whole, ApexThis serves as my publishing arm for all of my creative works, from songwriting to podcasting. If you're a writer, then you're likely familiar with setting up a publishing company for yourself or an indie publishing company. And if you're a songwriter, you do it for control of copyright and collection of all your royalties, amongst many other things. From a business aspect, setting up a publishing company is a standard step that writers take. From a personal perspective, ApexThis signals a challenge to take a task, a project, or an idea and go head on to reach its apex and be the best that it can be. Corny, I know. It was through ApexThis my first podcast was published.
Hello, and welcome to episode 0 of the Admins of Atlassian podcast. I'm your host, Mark Williams. This episode, we're just simply going to do the
It was 1 year ago that I
introduction.
spoke those words into my microphone. It was 1 year ago that I found something that I loved doing. The Admins of Atlassian podcast didn't just come out of the blue. It took many years to reach that point, many years to see the problem. Once I had a solution in mind, everything else just clicked. So why exactly this podcast? What is my inspiration to do this? When I first launched ApexThis as a blog, I was on a mission, and one aspect of it was to work less. In my research, I came across what they call passive income. If you don't know what that is, listen to this.
A number of things along the way. So here we go. We're going to get started by talking about, first, why is passive income important anyway? I know a lot of you who are listening to this have heard this already, but some of you are listening to SPI for the first time because I've told you to listen to this episode first. So passive income is really important to understand in a number of different facets. One, what it could do for you in terms of generating an income. The idea of passive income is that you get to do it without actually having to do work, because you've already put in that hard work. You're working hard now so you could reap the benefits later. There's never any account where you can just push a button and money will come in without you having to do anything. You're always going to have to do work. Put in the time, put in the research, and put in the blood, sweat, and effort, and the mistakes and the failures along the way in order to find that success.
That was Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income. After reading his blog and listening to his podcast, I found other blogs that were building passive incomes. Not only that, but they were sharing how. Every month, these blogs, including Pat's Smart Passive Income blog, would share what is called a blog income report. Now, everyone loves to see how much someone else makes. I certainly do. But once you get past the money, another story starts to unfold. Everyone has been inspired to share their successes and their attempts to start a passive income business, and reading others have inspired them. How does that answer why I'm starting this podcast? A podcast about the behind the scenes work of starting a podcast and publishing company? Inspiration. Those that have shared their blog income reports that detail their goals, successes, and failures of starting and running businesses inspired me to create my own blog income report. Now I'm just going to put it in audio form. That isn't my only inspiration. Many, many years ago, I was a big fan of Startup Junkies.
On this episode of Startup Junkies.
I'd be totally lying to you if I didn't say I'm in it for the money. I told them, this is it. No more messing around. If you try to mess around, we walk.
Because you're not revenue positive yet, everything that you do is an expense. That means we just blew through $7,000 in a week and a half, and we don't have any money in the bank. We cannot do this.
9 out of 10 startup companies fail. This is the story of one team determined to beat the odds. They are Startup Junkies.
This was a reality TV show that followed the building of startup Earth Class Mail. I remember at the time how fascinating this was, and I wondered if anyone has done anything like this in podcasting. I've been thinking a lot lately about starting another podcast, and the idea struck me while on a road trip. As soon as I got back home, I started to write down my ideas, show name, logo, and then I wondered, does something like this exist? After a few Google searches, I found Startup.
I'm Alex Bloomberg, and for a long time I was a producer at the public radio show This American Life, and also the co-creator of a podcast called Planet Money, where for years I reported on business and the economy. It was a great gig until I decided to do something rash. I decided to take what I learned from reporting on other people's businesses and start my own business.
Startup is a podcast about Alex trying to start a podcast company. I almost fell out of my chair when I listened to the first episode. This is what I wanted to do, except I won't actually be a startup, and I'm not even sure how I would even get to that point. The more I listened, the more doubt set in. Alex sounds great on the podcast, and I love the storytelling nature of each episode. That told me they were highly produced. I wondered to myself, how could I ever produce something that sounds half as good as that? Maybe this is a question that everyone struggles with, defeating ourselves before we can even begin. I was comparing my inexperience to others who are vastly more experienced. It wasn't until I went for a bike ride. As always, I uploaded my ride times into Strava and saw that I made some achievements. I had broken my previous times and my average speed was higher. That didn't just happen. That took blood, sweat, and metaphorical tears. Okay, maybe some real tears on a couple of hills, but it took work. We all got to start somewhere. Why not start with me? Coming up on the next episode, I regain my focus. Working a full day, coming home to chores, and everything else that it entails, I was starting to feel a bit overwhelmed. In fact, I was overwhelmed. With so much on my plate, I felt that progress was not being made. Thanks for listening to ApexThis Podcast, the introduction. You made it. Be sure to check out the show notes for any links to anything I've mentioned in the episode. If you like this episode and it sounds interesting, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play Music, or your favorite podcast app. You can also follow me at ApexThis on Instagram and Twitter. Until next time, take care.